Hey everyone, Westeros has a new hero in a hedge knight named Dunk, also known as Sir Duncan the Tall, and his young squire, affectionately named Egg. HBO's new series, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, based on George R.R. Martin's short stories, takes place between the House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones. What makes this series different, though, is the time period that it actually explores. The dragons, man, they are all but gone, reduced to these few scraggly creatures. And while the great houses of Westeros are still obsessing over power and the Iron Throne, because you know they are, a Knight of the Seven Kingdoms turns away from massive political battles to focus in on the simple life of a hedge knight. If you felt burned by where Game of Thrones eventually went or disappointed with how House of Dragon has been going, here's why this story just might remind you of why you fell in love with George R.R. Martin's world in the first place. What makes this series stand out is that it narrows in on what it means to live a good and honorable life in a world that does not always reward honor with grace or glory. We're not watching the powerful lords of Westeros anymore, even though they are still there. But this time, they are the backdrop, and we're watching a man who has to earn his meals, earn his armor, and even earn his place in the world. I hate using the term grounded because it feels overused, especially when talking about films and television, but that's really the best word for why A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms feels so very different from most epic fantasy on screen. This series, it makes Westeros feel real in a way that often eludes even the most thoughtfully created fantasy worlds. The first two episodes introduce us to Dunk as he buries his mentor, Sir Arlen of Pennytree. With nowhere else to go, Dunk decides to head to the town of Ashford to enter himself in the tournament, hoping to just prove that he is worthy of being called a knight and to start making a real life for himself. Along the way, he runs into this strange little bald boy who calls himself Egg. The boy questions literally just about everything Dunk does and challenges him in ways that are both funny and surprising. With no other options available to him, Egg follows the hedge knight to Ashford, deciding that he is now going to be Dunk's new squire, whether the knight wants it or not. Watching their relationship develop is one of the highlights of this series. Dunk doesn't quite know what to do with Egg or how to be a mentor, but he still tries to honor the memory of Sir Arlen by doing the best he can for the boy, because that's what Sir Arlen did for him. What I really love about this series is that we get a side of Westeros that feels just more sincere and lived in than anything that we ever got from a Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon. We see the everyday life of the knight without a house and a tournament that is busting at the seams with these professional knights, nobility, entertainers, food vendors, armor vendors, crowds of regular people who just come to watch the show. We finally get to see how regular people live in Westeros, creating this atmosphere of a real community instead of just a political drama with swords and dragons, which, don't get me wrong, is fun, but you really get a sense of who these people are, what matters to them, and really what drives them to do the things they do. The most compelling thing about the series is Sir Duncan himself. George R. R. Martin is known for writing morally complex characters who are more likely to lose their heads than not. And most of his stories, I have to say, there is no clear hero. There's not a clear hero that exists. Defying our expectations, though, we finally get somebody in Dunk who genuinely wants to do the right thing. One of the biggest differences here is that Dunk, He is a good man. He's not overly complicated like most characters in Game of Thrones, and we don't see him playing any political shenanigans. While he's clearly ambitious, Dunk isn't blindly driven by his ambition, nor is he a victim of his own cleverness and desire and greed. In a fantasy world that constantly rewards cruelty and power, following someone who just is a decent human being is honestly a genuine pleasure. Dunk is big, he's strong, and he's capable, but he's also really young and inexperienced at the same time. And we get him at this transitional moment in his life when he's figuring out how to do things and how things are supposed to go for him. He makes mistakes. He misjudges situations. And he is not some perfect knight in shining armor. And frankly, that's not just because he doesn't have any armor. There is this sincerity to him that feels like a breath of fresh air. For the first time in a long time, it feels like George R.R. Martin is giving us a hero we can afford to care about without hesitation. I will admit right up front that I am a little biased here. I am biased because these short stories are some of my favorite things that George R. R. Martin has written. They're sharp, they're tightly constructed, and they are deeply character driven stories that don't pull their punches while showing us this world through Dunk's eyes. That perspective casts everything we see through a lens of goodness without falling into the trap of naivete. What really gives me hope for this series is how closely involved George R. R. Martin has been with its creation. With both A Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, George was heavily involved in the early seasons, which were often the strongest, and they were the ones that got fans interested. As those shows moved further away from his direct influence, the storytelling became less coherent and more frustrating for viewers to watch in a variety of different ways. George isn't new to Hollywood. He's been writing and producing television shows since the early 1980s, long before he turned to writing fiction. And he has been very open about his frustrations with showrunners who come into a show wanting to put their own stamp on the stories that already exist and were good enough that studios wanted to produce them. They change the characters and they change the plot lines in ways that no longer reflect the original vision. And that is something he's talked about well beyond his own work. With A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, though, he has made it clear that this series, this is his baby. He is holding on to creative control here. And it shows even in the first few episodes. After watching so many of his stories kind of drift away from his original vision and fan expectations, this really feels like George is stepping in and saying, not this time. He's protecting it. And in the words of one of the most heartbreaking moments from Game of Thrones, it feels like A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is his way of standing in the breach and shouting, hold the door, over and over again. Because of that, everything about these two episodes feels just precisely and carefully thought out and introduced, which honestly, how many shows don't do this right nowadays? It's insane. But this one gets it right. And it's focused on character development rather than shock and spectacle. This series eases us into the world of regular people while methodically introducing us to new characters only when we need to meet them, which allows the story to build toward moments that feel earned. So, is this series for you? Well, if you enjoy fantasy, medieval style storytelling, tournaments, swordplay, character driven stories, I honestly think you are going to love this series. If you've ever been to a Renaissance fair, You know what I'm talking about. And if you enjoyed that atmosphere, the people, the sense of stepping into the past, and just feeling another time around you, there is a good chance that this series will speak to you. And if you liked the early season of Game of Thrones and, the things that came before it kind of devolved into these series that were more focused on shock value and spectacle, this feels much closer to that style of storytelling that roped most of us into the series on television that HBO had. On the other hand, if fantasy is not your thing, if medieval settings aren't for you, if you prefer modern stories, science fiction, crime dramas, anything like that, and these kind of more naturalistic stories from the medieval past, if that's not your bag, you probably won't enjoy this series. A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms really embraces the fantasy genre in the most unapologetic way possible. It knows what kind of story it wants to tell. And it's been a long time since I was this happy with a fantasy series on screen. And honestly, I was happy after episode one. After episode two, I was sold. And while I can't say for certain how it's going to hold up over time, it really feels like it is in conversation with fan expectations. For me, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms feels like a return to what made George R.R. Martin's stories so compelling in the first place. So far, I have high hopes for where this story is headed, but enough from me. Now I want to hear from you. Have you watched A Knight of Seven Kingdoms yet? Have you read the Dunk and Egg stories? Does this kind of smaller character driven fantasy story interest you, or do you prefer the larger political epic fantasy stories? And I gotta say, just before I wrap this up, that in some ways it reminds me of Andor. If Andor were an epic fantasy set in medieval times, it has that kind of sensibility about it. Let me know down in the comments what you think. I would love to talk with you about this. If this is the kind of deep dive, story focused discussion you enjoy, please do give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more. And YouTube will be sure to share future reviews with you and discussions. Thanks so much for being here, you guys. And hey, why not check out one of these reviews and let me know what you think? I'll see y'all again soon. In the meantime, happy viewing. Bye for now.